Welcome everybody. Welcome to the OIC Academy's public public lecture. My name is Aygul Abdubayetova. I manage research and training department at the OIC Academy in Bishkek. And it's my pleasure to introduce my colleague, associate research fellow at the OIC Academy, Niva Yau. Niva is originally from Hong Kong, but she's been based in Bishkek for the last couple of years, and we've been lucky to have Niva with us these couple of years. And Niva is interested, Niva's research interests include China's foreign policy in Central Asia, China's strategic thinking in the 21st century, including Belt and Road Initiative and everything related to China and Central Asia. So Niva is one of the most productive researchers at the OIC Academy. She's published already quite a lot, and she's given some policy recommendations to Central Asian governments. So I would like to welcome Niva. Niva is also, she frequently writes to Eurasia Net and The Diplomat on China Central Asian affairs. And today, Niva will be presenting her another new publication. This is a book chapter, China's Pursuit in Central Asia. This is a book chapter for forthcoming book to be published next year by Routledge. The book was titled as The EU, China, Central Asia, Global and Regional Cooperation in a New Era. So today Niva will talk about 40 minutes or so, and after that you will have a discussion, you'll have a chance to ask questions to Niva. I would like to encourage you to already start sending your questions to our chat, to general chat. And once Niva is done with her talk, she would be able to answer all your questions. So thank you everyone for joining us again. Now I would like to give the floor to Niva. So Niva, floor is yours.
Thank you, Aygul. I know you're busy this evening, so thank you for taking the time to introduce me, and thank you for your nice words, and have a nice evening. And I know you're busy.
Thank you.
So today, this is a book chapter, and it's because it's a book chapter, so I was able to be given this opportunity to write such an interesting topic, which is really take a step back and look at how China sees and how China views Central Asia in a more abstract way. I've done a lot of work on what China does here in the framework of the Belt and Road, or outside of the framework of the Belt and Road. I've done issues-based topics. I've done looking at different Chinese personnel in Central Asia, and so on and so forth. But this is the most kind of abstract topic that I've done, and also I think in a way the most academic topic I've done. So this is really taking a step back and looking at what is the domestic context that drives how China sees Central Asia, and one of the way that I went about doing it is through looking at China's domestic Central Asian studies. So what Chinese scholars say about Central Asia, who studies Central Asia in China, what drives them, and what are kind of the implications that come from their background and everything. And so I have to make a small disclaimer, because this is the most abstract academic kind of topic I've done. Some of the bits here are quite historical. So I'm not a historian, so I have to, I see that there are some, I think colleagues in this participants list that I think are themselves either China experts or speak Chinese. So this really it comes from my own observations of interacting and having dived into the world of Central Asian studies in the Chinese language. So some of the historical facts might not be 100% accurate, because as we know, China redirected a lot of the histories, especially foreign kind of policy and foreign kind of engagement with its neighbors. But nonetheless, you will see what I mean when I go on and talk about these, historical memories, and things like that. So the kind of rundown today is, first I'll go through the Chinese imageries of Central Asia. So how China sees Central Asia, and from under kind of which framework, is Central Asia under. And we have the Western regions. It is known as a CU, which is the region and the kind of name that Central Asia is still attached to in China. And then, within this geographical framework, we have two key memories, and that's the Silk Road, as we all know, and then also banishment and exile, which is a more kind of Chinese, only in China will get this kind of imageries and sentiment of Central Asia, and I'll explain more later. And then after that, I want to talk about how they impact Central Asian studies in China. And then also I want to talk about Central Asian studies in China. Who are the kind of leading scholars, think tanks, and what do they say, looking at the journals and things like that. And then, at last, I will go through some of the policy problems and implications that, because of, this whole kind of abstract issue, and then leading to scholars thinking a certain way, and then, what are the kind of problems. So, okay, if we first look at CU, the Western region, so the pictures here are from the Treaty of St. Petersburg in 1881. So before the Treaty of St. Petersburg in 1881, the entire region of Xinjiang, Central Asia, and further away, the entire region is referred to as the big umbrella of CU in Chinese literatures, and that's from official documents to scholars' work or academic work, and history and policy and music is all under this big umbrella of CU. So when the Russian rulers consolidated power and absorbed Central Asia into the Soviet Union, the Chinese western border, now we know as the new frontier, Xinjiang, came to end this CU discourse. But we have to keep in mind that CU was a discourse for over 2,000 years of how China understands Central Asia, and the lens for China to look at Central Asia. So this whole idea of Xinjiang, even today, is lumped together with what we today understand in Central Asia. And during the Soviet Union, Central Asia was not discussed on its own as an isolated region, but as part of the Soviet system. So when Chinese scholars were looking at, Central Asia, so-called Central Asia under Soviet Union, they weren't able to tell apart Central Asia from the Soviet system. And the concept of Central Asia was only introduced to China after the breakup of Soviet Union. So Central Asia as a geographical concept or notion is extremely new to China. So on one hand, you have CU, which is extremely embedded in Chinese history and Chinese culture. And then you have this notion of Central Asia, which is only 30 years old, which makes, looking at what is CU so important when looking at the kind of abstract way of the Chinese kind of thinking of, this region. So what is CU and what are the geographical boundaries? So on the left-hand side, you see this landscape map painting from the Ming Dynasty, which is roughly around 1300s, 1600s. And in that painting, it documented this traveler who went from Gansu province to Iran and Saudi Arabia. And this was the map of the Silk Road. So, so CU, as part of the, where the Silk Road is from, this is, you can't kind of, cut, disconnect the two concepts. So that's the kind of largest concept and this geographical stretch of CU. But in the most narrow form, and arguably, I would argue today, the most narrow form, CU is understood as Xinjiang and Central Asia. And within this large body of work on CU, there's documentation of diplomatic trips, travelers' notes, exchange letters, and a lot of popular literatures that are inspired by what's going on with in CU and CU's a history and relationship with China. So now, how does it impact the China's understanding of Central Asia today, this historical memory of CU completely transitioned into the Chinese foundational understanding of Central Asia. So if we look at these two Chinese academic articles, the contemporary Chinese perspective of Tajikistan on the right-hand side started not with Soviet Union. It actually completely, it only had one sentence about kind of the Soviet legacy in Tajikistan, but it talked about China's relationship, or the Chinese civilization's relationship with the Timur Empire, with the Khanate of the Bukhara, and it was reciting all these stories, and that's the same with the article on the left-hand side, Turkmenistan's role in the Silk Road, economic belt. It was talking about Parthia, how, the Chinese emperor of, Wu of Han, were heard about Parthia from one of the travelers, and he took a personal interest in learning, Parthia's management, which, back then the geographic location of, Turkmenistan now today, was part of Parthia. So this was all, the sentiment of CU, and it's still here today, even in political scientist work, even in historical works, and this is really is all tied together, and there is not really politically officially there's an effort to kind of bring this notion of Central Asia, 5 countries within the Chinese space, but really it is not working, and everything still is about CU. And the history of CU is also, when it comes to the Belt and Road Initiative, interestingly, a lot of the kind of political scientists were drawing the history of CU, to come up with kind of ways to better manage the Belt and Road. And this is kind of, where the problems start, because, there's an official kind of push to retell the history of CU. And part of this is retelling the history of Silk Road as peaceful and mutually beneficial. So there's a huge body of work on this, so I'm not going to talk about the Silk Road, but I want to look at how this is being retold. This is Xi Jinping's speech. I believe it was in Dushanbe. So he was talking about China and Tajikistan's amazing historical history, and here he recited how there's a Tajik poet and literary figures that were well known in China. There are musicians and dancers that are heavily featured in Chinese potteries. And then you have Xi Jinping again in Tashkent, Uzbekistan, talking about how an Uzbek politician who was born in Bukhara moved to China and served as a political officer in China. And then also another astronomical calendar scientists that were born in Samarkand, who were invited to China and were lived in China for 50 years. And then interestingly also, and this is just in Bishkek last year during the SCO summit, Xi Jinping said, the magnificent poems of Li Bai, which was, historians kind of debate the kind of, his ethnic origin. That was the great poet of the dynasty. He was born in Kyrgyzstan. And this is where it gets interesting, because in this effort of retelling this peaceful Silk Road, it was not peaceful. It is extremely one-sided and selective. And why? Talking about here, Li Bai in the Tang dynasty is extremely sensitive, because that's when Chinese foreign policy in CU changed from a management perspective to a long-term pursuit of stability. And this means that in the Tang dynasty, China extended jurisdiction towards Xinjiang, and that's when Kazakhstan and parts of Kyrgyzstan were part of China. So it wasn't really that peaceful, so-called peaceful and mutually beneficial. And likewise with this rosy Tajikistan history, of course these are true, but you completely just kind of not bring out all of the problems. For example, in would be today's Tajikistan, the Han Empire of Emperor of Wu waged a war against Dayuan, which is in today's Fergana Valley in Chinese. That little empire in Fergana Valley back in the day was called Dayuan, and the Chinese civilization invaded this tiny empire because the emperor heard that it had great horses. And then, so when Jiang Tian, this is the most famous Chinese diplomat that went to Central Asia and discovered the Silk Road whatsoever, when he returned to the Han Empire from his trip, he actually referred to the Central Asians as barbarians who were greedy for Han products and can be bribed and lured into the imperial court. So the actual history back then was nothing compared to the kind of peaceful, mutually beneficial, kind of that side of the story that China is trying to retell. And this effort to kind of redirect the memories to a more positive direction is because when you read the history, it's not a peaceful history. So the political official discourse is trying to redirect it, but as I'll explain later, it's not really working. Okay, so that's the first kind of key memory of Central Asia. And there's this second one, which is, and this is, the one that really makes all the difference today, and is the, Chinese imagery of Central Asia as banishment and exile. So, like I said, Treaty of St. Petersburg in 1881, and when that happened, Qing China, Qing dynasty and Chinese civilization began to deploy a population to basically colonize and defend the new border, which is today's Xinjiang. And the way they did it was through punishment of exile and banishment to Xinjiang. So what they did was they moved a population of political dissidents, the people that were against Qing China and the Manchu rulers, and they moved this population to Xinjiang. And being exiled to Xinjiang was the most severe sentence in Qing law, second only to execution. And why I put these two pictures here, because this is a wonderful book detailing this whole history of political exile in the mid-Qing China by amazing professor Joanna Whaley Cohen, who is one of the best sinologists alive today at New York University. Amazing Chinese language skills, not just Chinese language today, but also the ancient text. So it's really wonderful, wonderful book. A lot of research, and in her research, it showed that in 1784, you can see, I can put in this presentation here, the Qing Empire employed about 20,000 officials, of which almost 500 of them were serving sentences in Xinjiang. And that was the most severe case. But of course, as time went forward, there were more. And this created a kind of the base population of the first generation of kind of Han people in Xinjiang, and they were referred to as CU exiles as well. They were not in the popular literature. They were referred to as CU exiles. In the official kind of government records, they of course it's a Xinjiang exile, but everyone know them as CU exile, which is why again the CU discourse is still kind of here today. And those banished to Xinjiang, many of them political exiles, like I said, became writers because they were back then they were politicians. They were of the most educated population in the Chinese civilization, and they when they were in Xinjiang, they didn't give up their work. They became writers. They were examining the region and they were writing reports, hoping to get a second chance. And these are some of the more famous figures. Guess some of you might know, some of you won't, but here are what they look like. And the descriptions of the region, again, when they were writing, they were referring to Xinjiang as CU. And this was the works were used by Qing officials or even officials sometimes even today as introductions to the region and as background information and everything. And with this, how does that link to kind of Central Asia studies today? So when you think about doing academic work, you have to kind of go back to look at, especially in China, when you look at what are kind of past Chinese scholars that write about this region, immediately you find this huge body of CU discourse literature. You don't find any, you find very little amount of literature that refer to the region as Central Asia. 中亚 is extremely bizarre, and even when they write Central Asia, there are still traces of CU discourse. So this makes the kind of history of CU like inseparable to kind of the Central Asian studies in China today, and one of the kind of impact on this scholarly work is that it is hugely unpopular in China. The fact that there is a huge proximity to the memories of banishment, which was extremely negative. It makes people, it makes Chinese scholars, in China, or even, just the kind of more educated Chinese in general, have this idea that Central Asia is not a nice place. It's not really, the place that you, when you become educated, you want to be a scholar. It's not really the place, the region that you want to study. And so it's hugely unpopular, and even after Central Asia has its own independence and everything, the research that's done on Central Asia was extremely vague, and by that there was almost the people in this early period that studied Central Asia or were writing on Central Asia were Russian kind of speaking Chinese who were studying the Soviet Union, and then they went on to study Russia, and then they studied this, they studied A, B, C, D, F, G, and then Central Asia. So Central Asia is like the last kind of topic that they were right on. So it was the information, and it was really just not very rigorous. So there's a cultural dynamic here, and a historical dynamic to why Central Asian studies in China is not at all popular and is very disreputable. This failure to attract scholars is a paradoxical mismatch, to the supposedly important important role that this region has for kind of the Chinese government today, as they would constantly tell us. So here on the right hand side, I put in this Chinese study is called the Central Asian Studies in China: Knowledge Increase, Discovery, and Direction. So basically, it was a history done on looking at absolutely all the studies done on Central Asia in Chinese language. And in this research, scholars highlighted the kind of important points that I said about how it was very unpopular, how it was very faked initially, but then when it became politicized, when the Silk Road and Central Asia became politicized in China around 2012, 2013, then we saw this overwhelming amount of literature. But still, many Chinese scholars still treat the region as secondary at best in their expertise, and this is a problem. Okay, so let's talk about what these Chinese scholars, even with the small amount of them, what do they say about Central Asia? And I want to highlight that precisely because the Chinese kind of community of Central Asian scholars, or Chinese scholars that work on Central Asia, are so small. It creates this really interesting picture where I just have to kind of point out this phenomenon that the Chinese foreign policy making in China is not formal anymore. So academics who have personal access to leaders can, have their ideas heard and views taken very seriously. And also Chinese diplomats attend academic workshops together with some of the politicians whose work deal with Eurasia, for example. And with this, kind of small number of leading Chinese scholars on Central Asia, it makes these scholars access to politicians and diplomats extremely easily, and this kind of informal network is there. So these are the Chinese ambassadors around Central Asia currently. And views, where are they exercised? So there are two main forums about Central Asian studies in China. And the first one is the Central Asia and Shanghai Cooperation Organization and International Symposium, organized by the Shanghai Academy of Social Sciences. So the Shanghai Academy of Social Sciences is not very, doesn't have a strong tie to the government. However, because they were started so early as tied to the SCO, this forum have a really strong relationship with Central Asian and Russian think tanks. And it's always been a rare opportunity for Chinese scholars to speak with Central Asian and Russian experts directly at those forums for many years. And in recent years, as Central Asia became politicized, the Chinese MFA, the research arm of the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs, also started funding this forum. And this is also a forum that is frequently attended by Chinese diplomats and politicians. And what do they say? So there are a lot of things they say, and I just pick out some of the kind of key points that I, pick out from these reports from these forums. Of course, because it's kind of like an SCO-centric forum, they always highlight the success in building consensus, so on and so forth. But also, increasingly, a lot of Chinese scholars highlight this failure in cultural cooperation. Namely, they highlight this lack of cultural understanding of China in Central Asia. They complain that a lot of Central Asians don't speak Chinese or understand Chinese history or don't understand what China wants in the region. And this is kind of one source of the anti-China kind of sentiment. This is very interesting. And then, one of the very interesting, they also highlighted that, when India and Pakistan became part of SCO, as the official language changed from Russian to English, these Chinese scholars highlight that it's a good thing that, there's an ideological shift. That China affairs in the region is no longer confined to a China-Russia competition. So, in a way, they were kind of recognizing that SCO was really a ground for China and Russia to compete, and that with the introduction of South Asian states, it moved beyond that. And with the introduction of South Asian states, they were also suggesting, for example, in Afghanistan matters, one of the very interesting one was that they suggested, the China-Pakistan Railway to extend to Kandahar to provide money incentive for the Taliban to protect a vibrant business environment. And how effective are these suggestions? You might think is actually quite effective, because we see that currently, China or Chinese companies, they are building, roads and railways in Afghanistan, connecting to Pakistan. So, these views do account to something in the end. And the second forum is China Social Science, the Central Asia Forum. It is a lot newer, and it's organized by the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. Now, CASS has, out of all the think tanks, almost have the strongest ties to the government in China, and the scholars themselves submit papers to the Chinese foreign policy makers officially, and they are directly tasked by the Chinese MFA. And within CASS, there's a small group of Chinese scholars that work on Central Asia. Specifically, they have a Central Asian office, and they have 7 scholars, and they're all led by Dr. Jiang Ning on the left-hand side here. These forums, the topics are broader because it's not confined by the SCO. So there's a lot of policy suggestions for Chinese policymakers and audience. And one of the interesting kind of topic that I picked out from one occasion of this particular forum was that a Chinese scholar was talking about Central Asian regionalism, and how a more united Central Asia will see economic integration with China more beneficial, because as there's more connectivity, there's more kind of money flowing into Central Asia, that Central Asia will be more united and see that China is their kind of best neighbor. And another way of these scholars expressing their views is, of course, through a journal. And the top kind of leading journal on Central Asia is this journal called Russian, East European and Central Asian Studies. And it's a journal that focuses on Russia and former Soviet Union countries by CASS. Now, when I said Central Asian Studies in China is extremely unpopular, now you have the leading journal on Central Asia, which is even taking Central Asia as such a minute part of what they publish. So every year they publish 60 articles per year, and the amount they publish on Central Asia is extremely disappointing. So I looked at the articles that they published from 2015 to 2019. Only 45 out of 300 total published articles, only 45 were about Central Asia. Now, on the right-hand side, you will find this data, this kind of table of these 45 journal articles on Central Asia, and I kind of categorized them, by different kind of topics. And as you can see, only 3 journal articles were devoted solely to the domestic Central Asian politics at a country level, and everything else were involving Central Asia and China, or involving one particular Central Asian country, to China, or it was topics. So immediately, going back to that review study by, a Chinese scholar looking at all the Central Asian papers that were ever written in Chinese language, already the same rationale is the same kind of problem also emerged. It's the fact that Chinese scholars don't study domestic Central Asian politics. And when we look at the 3 that were studied, the 2 of them were about Uzbekistan, about the post-Karimov era, and also about one focusing on recent political developments in Kyrgyzstan. So domestic Central Asian politics is not really of interest to Chinese scholars, and the rest of the studies were almost entirely China-centric. If not China-centric, then a good proportion of it study influences from other external actors such as United States and Turkey, and how they intersect Chinese interests. So what this tells us is that China doesn't care about domestic Central Asian politics as much, care a lot about what Central Asia can offer to China, and also this kind of great game mentality of looking at what is everyone else, also, at stake in Central Asia. Now, this almost non-existent perspective view from Central Asia, again, like I said, is also highlighted by this academic review journal of absolutely all the papers that were ever written about Central Asia in Chinese language. And beyond this particular academic paper as well, a lot of Chinese scholars working on Central Asia constantly highlight that Central Asian studies in China generate writings that about how China can benefit from Central Asia, and not really offering insights from the perspective of Central Asia. So main problem, because of the cultural and historical context, there is a huge problem of attracting young Chinese scholars, and all of the Chinese scholars working on Central Asia in China are extremely self-aware of this problem. And so because of this, for example, the discussions on China-Turkmenistan bilateral relations were oddly optimistic, and there is no reference to the fact that domestically for Turkmenistan, the Turkmen experiences with Iranian and Russian sanctions have strongly facilitated Turkmen reliance on China. So it was almost as if this is kind of like not a factor for China. It was something that was not even really considered. Now, there's also another problem that a lot of these Chinese scholars, like I said, are not experts on Central Asia. They do a lot of things like Russia, former Soviet Union, EU, or CSTO, and then the last thing they do is Central Asia, which makes Central Asian studies in China really problematic and really not very rigorous, as for example American studies in China is extremely kind of detailed. European studies in China is very detailed. Now, what are some of the kind of political implications? So as like I said, because Central Asian studies in China is so weak. China's policy in Central Asia, therefore, is built on top of an extremely thin layer of intellectual foundation. If you don't have scholars who can honestly make an assessment about what's going on, then naturally you will not have policymakers that have access to truthful information. And kind of the cherry on top is that the field of Central Asian studies in China is kind of really controlled by a handful of Chinese scholars, which makes their personal views and biases even more kind of apparent. So with this little experience working with today's Central Asia, China has opted to revoke memories of long historical ties with with the immediate Western neighbors, and that's why we see the Silk Road discourse being retold, and at the same time there is a serious neglect of Central Asian politics, and especially with a little consideration of each Central Asian countries as independent agents. And I suppose we can also kind of criticize the Western style of Central Asian studies is also kind of not understanding Central Asian countries as independent agents. Is always post-Soviet, is always Russian legacy. For China, this is also the same, but China looks at the history of CU and understanding Central Asia as CU, and not understanding Central Asia as today's Central Asia, and not understanding Central Asia as independent agents. Now, this means that there's a lack of meaningful policy insights. Well, you might think, if Chinese scholars were interacting with Chinese diplomats and politicians so much in these forums and all of these settings, why won't they somehow actually have more access to information? But the fact is, Chinese diplomats in Central Asia don't share information with Chinese scholars, and the scholars therefore generate very little independent policy analysis. Okay, some of the consequences, I think, of my audience here, I think majority of them are Central Asians, and I'm sure you're aware, there's a rising anti-China sentiment, and this comes with one of the consequences, the fact that China for 30 years have relied on building personal relationships and trust with Central Asian leaders and business leaders and political leaders, and they are completely unaware of some of the core problems that have sparked and prolonged Sinophobia in the region. Because they, just have these leaders telling them and promising them all sorts of things, and they don't have an independent kind of assessment from scholars that are, who don't have pressure to perform a political career like these Chinese diplomats do. And so the Chinese government, people at the very high level just remain absolutely overly optimistic, and in many cases misjudge the kind of backlash and the threats that some of these projects will have in the region. And also, diplomatic passiveness as well, because, simply they just understand, not very much. So to wrap up out of this, I actually don't know how long I have until, but to wrap up out of this, I guess if I have, extra time, we can go with questions. So if I can just wrap up all of this first. So at the most abstract level, what this kind of presentation, what my book chapter, and what my research, and what this particular research wanted to do was to show that at the most abstract level, China's foundational understanding of Central Asia is tied to the historical relationship between China and Central Asia before Soviet Union, and this CU discourse. And this has an enduring effect on China's interaction with Central Asia today, as it is from the point of view of academic and policy works. And this, highlighting this, absence of critical inquiry is a one-way street to poor decision making, as we already see in the past 30 years of China's foreign engagement in Central Asia. And as we know that, as both, domestic and international security problems and economic problems are emerging, the failure to address these issues with honest assessments is really going to cost China the much desired long-term stability it wants. In Central Asia, China's foundational understanding is extremely ideological, with very little examination of reality. And this lays the ground for problems that have had happened in the past, and this also lays the ground for problems that will endure if this honest assessment remain absent. So I want to thank you for my audience today, and I can take some questions now, and I will answer 2 at a time. And if that's okay with you, I want to close my presentation now. If you want it, you can email me right here. I'm also on Twitter, so that's very easy.